a professor wanted to captivate his class at the beginning of the semester. So he opened by telling the absolute best joke that he had. The class roared in laughter. Having won them over, he moved on to the syllabus and began walking through what they would be doing that semester. When he got to the end of the syllabus, he turned to the class and he told him the same exact joke again. Same pacing, same punchline, very different result. Confused, there were a few chuckles. He noted the change in response and began his lecture. And he started the class off right, heading in the right direction. And he was really flying when he stopped and told the same joke yet again. There was no laughter. The class was fully awkward. He paused. He had them right where he wanted them. Why is it, he wondered, that we only have the capacity to laugh once at a joke? But we cry, mourn, hurt, worry over and over and over about the same thing. When we have trouble and struggle and hurt in our life, it can consume us. But moments of joy and laughter and happiness must be caught in the moment. We cannot seem to replicate it. This series that we've been working through the month of Thanksgiving is the idea of trying to practice gratitude, being intentional about it, that we might notice how much blessing we have in our life and really begin to become even consumed by the blessings and the joy that we have in our life, because it turns out that we really must practice it in order to embody it. Because we are inclined, the way we are wired as people, to find the negativity boiling up to the surface. And there are many ways why this is. Some of us were raised this way and taught this way, to not let our emotions get out, to not show them, to be stoic, if you will. I'm from New England. I was raised by New Englanders, and New Englanders are, by definition, stoic. And stoicism basically just means that a person can endure pain or hardship without showing their feelings or complaining. It was an entire philosophical system of the ancient Romans and Greeks. It was a way of life in order to show that the worst of life could not get you. And in New England, the people have embodied this to a ridiculous degree. It's almost like they think, you might hurt me, but you will never have the satisfaction of knowing it. It's a strange way to live. And yet, it's how many of us are. We create these whole personas and characters with tough outside shells. And what it does is, like I talked about last week in one of the studies I shared, it keeps us from being as grateful externally as we think we are. We think we say thank you. We think we are appreciative. We think that people know that we love them. But they know it and experience it far less than the reality of what we assume we do. Another possible reason that we struggle with gratefulness is we may not realize the scale to which we are actually blessed. I read a study from 2018, just a couple years ago, where Americans were asked to peg where they fit economically in the world. Not so much in their neighborhood, not so much in the city or state that they lived in, but in the entire world. And so Americans were asked in this survey what they thought was the median income in the entire world. So I'm not going to have you say it out loud, but just think about that for a second. What do you think is the median annual income in the entire world? In that study, Americans guessed on average $20,000 a year. That's what they thought the median income in the world was. The truth is that the median income in the world is $2,000 a year. That's the median income. Americans assume that the median income is 10 times higher than it actually is. And if we think that we're only doing so much better than the median, it's hard for us to realize just how incredibly blessed we are. Similarly, they were asked a similar question, but in a different way. A group of Americans were asked, what percentile do you think you are in terms of income in the entire world? So 1 would be the top 1 wealthiest percent in the world. 100 would be in the lowest percentile in the world. Where do you think you are? And Americans guessed on average the 37th percentile, which means Americans assume they're kind of in the upper middle class in the world. On average, that's where they guessed they were, the upper middle class, 37th percentile. But almost every American resident is in the top 10% in the world for income. You see the scale difference here in the way that we assume that middle and the center is so much less than it is, keeps us from seeing just how much we have and just how blessed we are. I heard it put like this by Andy Stanley. He's a fairly famous pastor in the Atlanta, Georgia area. A few years ago, he was whining to himself about going to the DMV. I whine more to not so much to myself, but to everyone around me when I have to go to the DMV. I hate the DMV. I don't think there's anything I would rather do less than go to the DMV. I am not a patient person. I hate patience, and it bothers me deeply that the New Testament says that patience is a fruit of the Spirit. I don't want patience. I hate being patient. I have things to do, and sitting and waiting on other people drives me crazy. So I'm pretty sure that the DMV is a good preview of hell, which draws me closer to Jesus, so I never have to go there. I hate the DMV. Jake went to the DMV this week, Pastor Jake. He had to transfer everything from Oregon to Maryland, which I'm pretty sure I'm now putting on the internet that you were in violation of the law. Sorry for that. He's only lived here a year and a half, but, pandemic allows things, right? But he didn't complain near as much as I complain when I have to go to the DMV. I complain for weeks in advance and then weeks afterwards. I hate the DMV. But Andy Stanley wrote that when he was at the DMV, he was in that same place. Oh, it's inefficient, slow. What are they doing? Why does it take so long? I don't have time for this. All of the things that he might think, until he realized the fact that he was at the DMV made him so incredibly privileged. Because in order to have a car to register with the state of Georgia in his instance, in order to have a car to register, that automatically makes you in the 6% wealthiest people in the world. And that shifted his mindset in that moment. So often we're inconvenienced by the stuff we have, when the stuff that we have is such an indicator of just how blessed we are in our own life. And thinking in this way is so helpful to move us towards gratitude, because we should ask ourselves, where do we get these ideas of what wealth and poverty looks like? How many people in the world would look at our average lives and think that we are living like kings? Where do we get our ideas, our definitions of enough, our definitions of more, our definitions of better, our definitions of worse? Where do we get our definitions of wealthy or poor? Do we get these by looking at our neighbors who have more than us? Is that really, truly what defines for us what wealthy looks like? Do we ever think, well, my pool in the backyard doesn't have a windy slide like my neighbor does? My car is a Honda and not a Mercedes, so I must not be wealthy. What is it that's defining for us what wealth looks like? Because it seems to me we have a tendency to look above us and become jealous of what we don't have and define ourselves as sort of marginalized or middle, rather than spending very much time looking below us and thinking about how well off we are. We don't do a very, very good job at all of placing ourselves in the truth and the reality of what we do have. And if that's the case, it's no wonder that we struggle with gratitude. Because we can always imagine ourselves having more, we struggle to be so thankful for what it is that we do have. And so today I wanted to talk a little bit about God's blessing and what God's blessing looks like and how it is that God expects us to steward God's blessing. And by doing that, I wanted to look at the story of Abram in Genesis chapter 12. We're just going to read 5 verses together. And this story is really all about God's blessing and the particularity of his blessing for one person. And it answers some questions about why does God bless people? What is God up to when blessings flow down? And so I'm going to invite you, if you will, to stand with me as we read Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 5. The Lord, Yahweh, said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land that I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." So Abram went, as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all of his possessions they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. Those who study the book of Genesis will note that there's a major change that happens that we miss in just reading chapter 12 here today. Most people who read it sort of understand that Genesis 1 through 11 is the marking in the story of the beginning. And the stories are fairly general, as if what is happening in the world that God has created. God is the creator at the very beginning. He creates order out of chaos. He creates with particularity and with precision. It is a gift, and he hands it over to Adam and Eve, his human creation that he loves so much. He asks them to steward it, and he gives them only one command, that they would not eat of one particular fruit. Adam and Eve, of course, do that, and sin runs out of control. And much of the next few chapters after Adam and Eve, up through chapter 11, is the story of sin running rampant in the world. God acts as an agent trying to stamp out sin, and there are times that people show up, but God seems to be more at war with sin than particular people. There's a lot of generality. And so God looks at the world, it is sinful, and so he sends a flood trying to purify it from the sin. He calls Noah and asks Noah to build an ark and builds the ark, but Noah isn't necessarily the plan for salvation. Sin carries on and goes way out of more control to the point that people decide that they could become like God, and they begin to build a tower, trying to reach the heavens in the perspective of God. And God sees this, and sin is just out of control, and he confuses their language and spreads them across the entire world. And then we're introduced to the family of Abram. Abram is from a place called Ur. It's quite a name, U-R. He's from Ur. And in this story that we read today, God promises him land in Canaan by way of Haran. Now, I don't know about you, but those words don't mean anything to me. I don't know where they are. And so I brought a map with me just to show you just how crazy this idea that God gives him is. Now, this is scaled in pretty far, so if you know your geography, you may still struggle to place this a little bit. In the bottom left-hand corner is Egypt, and therefore it's the very northeast corner of Africa. This big, large piece of land in the center bottom is what we would call Saudi Arabia today. Up in the upper left-hand corner starts leading into Europe over the top of the Mediterranean. I believe that is Turkey right there. The rivers through the middle are what is called the Tigris and Euphrates River. They cause for very fertile land, and people who study the Old Testament and have tried to figure out where the Garden of Eden is assume that the Tigris and Euphrates created that fertile land that allowed for a garden. And then all the way to the left where this ends is Canaan, which is modern-day Israel. And so this piece of land is often in the news today, but it's also the trek that we're told Abram at this point makes in his life. Ur is where he's from, and the family have journeyed up along the Euphrates River to a place called Haran. And it's in Haran that God meets Abram in this story and tells him, I want to make you a great nation. I want to bless you. All you have to do is go. Go. And I will fulfill my end of the covenant. And this place is Canaan, which is the last journey all the way down to the bottom. Now, Abram has all sorts of people and possessions. He has got a lot of stuff. And the idea of making this trek at 75 years old on foot with maybe like a horse or donkey and a trailer is absolutely beyond me. I look at this trek, especially starting in Ur all the way to the east, all the way then to Canaan in the west, and I think, I don't know if I would make that trek in any way other than an airplane today. I wouldn't want to get in a car and drive across that politically charged land. And so Abram is doing all of this on foot. And so God calls to his achy-boned 75-year-old body and says, go. I will make you a great nation. I will give you the land of Canaan. And if you read this blessing language, the strong noun in it is I, God speaking for himself. God is going to do the work. And the verbs are will make. I will do. I will make happen. I will go before you. God is promising big things, big blessings to Abram. Abram's role is simply to receive the blessings and to go. So he receives this call. And the call is, we learn pretty quickly, an insane one. Abram is 75 and is being told about generations and a nation and all that God will make out of him if he's willing to be faithful to say yes. And Abram has no children at 75 years old. I turned 40 this year. Every bit of what Abram is asked to do here is things I'm not interested in doing at 40. I don't want to be traveling, walking a donkey and all my stuff. I don't want to move. I don't want to have kids anymore. I'm happy with the kids I have. I'll finish them. I don't want to start over. 75 years old. And what he's asked is to go. And God says, I will do the rest. I will care for the rest. I want you to go. And when you receive the blessings I have for you, I want you to bless those around you as well. And so God is enacting his plan to undo the sin in the world. He's no longer destroying things. That's not working. Fighting fire with fire is not working. God moves from this generality of creation to this particularity of calling one person, a person who seems unlikely and unequipped for the job. But God shows up to him and casts a grand vision about how God's blessings are going to pour into his life, but they're not meant for him to simply hold on to. He's going to go and move, and he's going to pass them off around to him as well. People will be blessed because a person that God has blessed is in their presence. And Abram is not supposed to hold on to these blessings for his own. He passes them off because God will continue to bless the next day and the day after that and the day after that. So Abram hears this call and he goes. And for the most part, he blesses those who bless him. He becomes a blessing for others. But the story of Abram is fascinating in that the fullness of God's promise is never realized in Abram's own life. The fullness of God's promise comes as generations begin to establish themselves after him. And those that he promises through Abram's lineage, man, there are struggles at times. It's not always linear. It's not always upward. It's just a couple generations later of Abram's family that is enslaved in Egypt, that needs a mighty act of God in order to be freed back into this land of Canaan that's promised to be the place where God will set up Abram's descendants. The blessings come, but they're not always linear. Sometimes there are difficulties, but the blessings keep on coming. Abram's job is simply receive them, bless those around them, and trust that the blessings will come again. And to go, and to trust, and to believe that God is who God says he is. The whole story of Abram makes me think a little bit about water and how water works. In particular, I'd like to talk about rivers for just one moment. I've got a picture of a time lapse of a river here. And the dates on this are 1984 when the time lapse starts and 2012 when it ends. And this is just a satellite image of how much a river changes across 28 years. Among the things I want you to notice is that if you're ever offered a piece of land in between the meander of a river, do not buy that piece of land. It is going to erode and it's going to change. But water is such an unbelievably powerful force that it erodes the land around it and changes the topography of the ground that it goes through. There's no way that we can control the rush of a water as it comes through. And we may think as we see a river that we understand where it is now. But really, 30 years is a pretty short amount of time to see this amount of land and life forcefully changed over time. Because water is an unrelenting force. A river is essentially water that starts high up and moves downstream, and it creates for itself a path of least resistance to get to wherever it finally dumps out into a larger piece of water. And I'll be honest with you, I functionally understand what a river is. I can define it. But whenever I see a mighty rushing water, I have a really hard time imagining and understanding how it doesn't eventually run out of water. Have you ever thought about this before? I've been to Niagara, right on the edge. There's like this piece of glass so that you don't jump in, because it's quite a drop. But you can see so clearly in this glass the powerful force by which that water comes through before it goes out over the edge. And it's a lot of water. It's wide and it's rushing incredibly fast. And the couple times that I've been there and thought that, I just think like, how does this never stop? How in the world is there always more water to rush through? You would think eventually something on the other end would turn off the spigot and the water would stop coming, but the water just keeps coming. So it is if you go to like the Rocky Mountains as well. You can take, roads are often carved next to rivers because there's already been some erosion and a path created. And I drive by through the Rockies, these just rushing waters, and it's some of those most beautiful things you can ever see, but there's an inherent danger to it because it's uncontrolled and it's not going to stop. And you see in this picture as well that when water finds a cheaper and easier way, it will eventually cut through that cheaper, easier way, and it will cut off where it was before. And when that cut is made, it leaves usually a rounded former meander, then with no source of water into it. And I took one science class in college. Science was not my best subject. So I took one class, it was geology. And I learned that when the river cuts through and cuts off that meander, that's called an oxbow lake. Now you've learned something today, for sure. It's an oxbow lake, and that oxbow lake becomes tame. It no longer has force or power. It only flows and empties based on rain at this point. There's no source that comes through. It becomes kind of a safe little pond or lake off to itself. But the river keeps carrying forward, and it keeps moving and shifting and changing the land around it. And in so many ways, I think this is what Abram and then we as God's people are called to be as well. That we may not fully always understand where this is all coming from, or how God is blessing us, or how God is choosing us, or how God is going to help us through tomorrow. But somehow the blessings keep on coming. And we don't receive the blessings to hold on for ourselves, but we receive them that we might actually change the environment that we're around. That the world around us might actually be changed because of how blessed we are, and we don't hold it for ourselves, but we are blessed, like Abram, to be a blessing as well. And practicing gratitude will help us get to that sort of place, that we recognize the faucet at the end is not going to be turned off. That when we receive God's blessing, we bless those around us, recognizing that the blessings are going to keep coming. That's the act of faith that Abram is called to, that we are called to. On the other hand, like an oxbow lake or maybe a reservoir, that tends to be how often non-grateful people receive their blessing. Reservoir is essentially someone went to a river and put a dam in it so that the water would stop flowing. And when the water stops flowing, it starts pooling. And the water does the same sort of work of controlling the land around it. It just starts rising. And you would dam up a river essentially because you want a source of water for yourself. You want to make sure that there's enough for you in your town and that river never dries up. You want to make sure that you've done just enough work to make sure there's enough for me and us. The reservoir is a great concept if you're giving drinking water to a whole town, but for so many of us who are so incredibly blessed by God, that's how we receive God's blessings. We begin to receive and we can never quite have enough. So we start creating dams around, trying to make sure that the waters rise in our own life, to make sure that every morning we can look out and look over our reservoir and say, I'm going to be okay for another month. I'm going to make it again for another year. And the water keeps rising, and we keep building dams, and we keep saying, oh, I've got enough for me. Now, when we're creating dams and making reservoirs for ourselves, as opposed to a river that flows down from heaven through our life, who is God when we're trusting the river? And who is God when we're making our own reservoirs? At a certain point, we just trust ourselves to keep building and making a bigger and bigger pond for ourselves. And no longer are we worried about creating an impact around us, but making sure that our reservoir is big enough to take care of us. But God showers blessings on the daily. God promises to care for us. God promises to keep the blessings coming. And he wants us, as he did Abram, to receive these blessings and to do so with gratitude and joy, to be happy, to be overwhelmed that God would see us in our particularity and take care of our needs, and then see that we receive it as stewards and make a change in the world around us because we are blessed to be a blessing. Only find out that there are new blessings tomorrow, and new blessings the day after that, and new blessings the day after that as well. Abram didn't become blessed by God so that he could walk around saying, well, look how blessed I am. God blessed Abram to change the world. God blessed Abram because sin was destroying the fabric of God's good creation. And Abram could receive the blessings of God and change in equal force the opposite of what sin was doing around him. When God blesses us, we can undo the effects of a broken world around us by being blessed in order to be a blessing. Now, I didn't really talk about money except when I talked about how much we don't realize how much we have in America. And I don't want this really to be about money. In fact, through this whole gratitude thing, I've not once asked you to think, hey, show some graciousness or some gratitude or some thanksgiving for how much money you make. I'm not convinced at all that that's really what this is about. In fact, I want you to think quite differently than that. We are blessed with an unbelievable amount of things. And being grateful for all of those things help us to see that all of the blessings we have are not meant for us to hold on to ourselves. And for those of you who are parents, especially those of you who are parents whose kids have left the house, you realize just how much you don't get to hold on to the blessings you have. Once upon a time, those children were babies in your arms and you had to hold them 20 hours a day. But eventually they leave and you have to set them free. This is the way we're meant to be with most of our blessings, that we receive them and we let them go, knowing that God will give us a new blessing tomorrow. So I wanted to read a proverb to you as we go, thinking about all of the ways that we might possibly receive blessings and be generous with them. The proverb goes like this: a generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. I'll read it again. A generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. What an important reminder that God blesses us. And when he sees us being generous, he blesses us all over again. And so I want you to think about this well beyond money. Think about all of the ways you can be generous with what God has blessed you with. There are ways that you can be generous with time. You can be generous with praise. You can be generous with forgiveness. You can be generous with favor, generous with mentorship, generous with empowerment, generous with kindness, and on and on and on. And these are all things that we give away out of the relationship that God has established with us. We have been forgiven beyond our wildest deserving. We've found favor and empowerment and time and everything that God has given us beyond what we deserve. So we match God's generosity by giving it back. That the world that we are meandering through might be changed by the force of God given to us as a gift that we give away as a gift as well. And so with all that in mind, I invite you as we close out today to celebrate all the things that God has blessed you with, to be thankful, to be overwhelmed, to be joyous for the ways that God has given you blessing after blessing, that you might understand yourself to be blessed as Abram was, that you might bless those around you as well. And so today we're going to sing a song that is a blessing. And it's going to be the way that we essentially end our service today, that you would stand, sing with me, and receive this blessing. Sing it out as well, and remember that God is continuously blessing you. And hopefully this work of gratitude that we've done this month gives us eyes to see the incredible ways in which God has blessed us, that we might receive it, find joy in it, and then give it away. Would you stand with me as we sing?